Today I'm going to be going over the deployment of the Azure AI Document Processor Accelerator. So you can see here there's deployment instructions. I've already forked the repo and I've already cloned it into my environment. And I've also run AZ login and AZD auth login ahead of time to avoid exposing any credentials. So I'm going to start with this step here of running AZD up and kind of walk through what gets run and point out anything that might be relevant. So if we come to my VS Code here, you can see that we have this repo cloned, and I'm going to run AZD up. Okay, and actually, before I do that, I'm going to reinitialize my environment, just so that you can see that process as well. So I'm going to clear this out. Okay, so now I'm going to run AZD up, and it's going to prompt me for some pieces of information. So we have a unique environment name, so I'm just going to call this I'm going to call this ADP environment demo. Okay. All right, now it's going to ask me for a subscription. So this is the subscription I'm going to use. And it's going to ask me for an AOAI location. Now, this is going to be separate from the location of your other resources, or I should say it can be separate because there's limited model availability. In this case, we have the model we want in East US. We're using GPT-5 Mini, and that can actually be checked in this documentation here. And so you can see in the models table, you can go to GPT-5 Mini, and we can see here that it is available in East US. So that's great for us. So I'm going to go ahead and select East US. Deploy VM, I'm going to set this to false for now. That's for more secure environments, which we could go over in another video. But for now, I'm going to be focusing on the public deployment where we communicate over public HTTP. And I'm going to select the dedicated function app host plan. The other option of flex consumption is something that you might use if you have demand that spikes at certain times and you wanted to only charge the function app when it was being consumed. So for this location, I'm also going to select ECUS. And for network isolation, again, that's a security requirement sometimes, but in this case, we're going to say false for this demo. Then we need our user principal ID. So you can get that by running the command AZAD signed in user show. And so I'm going to get this this principal ID, okay, and I'm going to paste it in here. And then we enter a password for the VM. Again, we're not actually deploying this VM, but it still is going to prompt you for it, so you can enter a valid password value there, but you probably won't need it for this deployment. And then it's going to ask you for a resource group you want to use. In this case, I'm going to use the one that they give me. So now it's actually going to provision the resources. So when you run this AZD up command, there's actually a few subcommands that get performed. This first one, where you're initializing the different environment variables, this is called AZD init, and that is going to get stored. All that configuration information is going to get stored in this .azure directory here. So you can see here some of the variables that we just selected, and I think the config.json will have parameters as well that are going to be specific to our bicep template. So we just got an error for this model version. So I'm actually going to show how we can fix this. So this might be relevant if you're deploying a model other than GPT-5 Mini. You actually have to make sure that the version is updated as well. So if I go here, we can see here that the version associated with GPT-5 Mini is actually this 2025-8.7 version. So this might be helpful if you ever encounter this error when you're deploying a different model. You might be able to update that there. Okay. So now that that's updated, I think I should be able to rerun AZD up and continue forward with the deployment. Oh, I typed that in wrong. And as I was mentioning, so the variables get stored in this AZD environment. Okay, so this controls the location. Some of the other things I mentioned. There's also this config.json, which controls variables that are going to go in the bicep template. So this is all good. And the other thing to note here is that the some other some other factors that are going to play into this deployment pipeline are going to be present in this azure.yaml file in the root of your project. So in here, you can see here you have the name of the project. You have the infrastructure as code template that we're going to use. In this case, it's main.bicep. So you can inspect that and make any updates as you see fit. Then during the actual, so this is for the provisioning of the resources. And during the deployment of the code, we're going to specify that we are going to be deploying this pipeline directory, and we're going to be deploying it to a function app. So this is going to be using Azure Durable Functions, and the language is Python. And then you can also specify various hooks that you want to run. So post provision, so this would mean after the resources are provisioned, you can run certain scripts to either update the resources or do anything that needs to be done that maybe couldn't be done in the bicep template. So in this case, we're just going to upload a sample file and a prompts.yaml as a part of this script, which is going to be used in our pipeline. So you can see here, you can track your progress of the deployment. You can see that so far all the resources are deploying properly. And I can click on this link if I want here to get some progress update. Now this is going to give you some more detailed information on the individual deployment. And if something goes wrong, this is a great place that you can troubleshoot and get more information. So now I'll go back to our code base here and we'll give this some time to deploy. All right, so now we're seeing the resources have been provisioned and we're progressing to the actual deployment of the code. So this is equivalent to the AZD deploy commands. So as I mentioned, this is going to be using this pipeline function, and it's going to deploy all of this pipeline code to the function app. Okay, so now we can see that the provisioning workflow is finished. Took 7 minutes and 13 seconds. And let's go ahead and look at our resources and see what we got. So if I go to the Azure portal, I can navigate to the resource group, which I just deployed, which is this environment demo. Okay. And then the first thing that we want to check after we've deployed is go to the function app and make sure that you can see your functions right here. Now, if you can't see your functions right here, this is something that often happens, especially if you're making updates or maybe if you didn't provision the IAM roles properly or if something broke in the pipeline, it's possible that the functions do not show up here. And in that scenario, some of the ways that you can troubleshoot is by SSHing into the VM. Now, this is only going to be available if you did the dedicated option. So you can SSH, and maybe I'll actually just show that briefly. So you have to click continue here, log in again. Okay, so now you're inside the actual function app here. And so you can move around a little bit using your bash commands. And we can see that there's a home directory. Okay, you have this deployment log stream, you have log files, and you have site. Okay, those are the three directories that I find myself using when I troubleshoot the function apps. So in deployment log stream, this is going to give you some more detailed logs about your deployment. And if you, like I said, if something went wrong, you might want to visit here and see what you can discover. If at the bottom you see deployment successful, that's likely a sign that the issue is not in the deployment, that everything went well. Now, if you don't get this, or you scroll up and you see some errors that are present, like maybe something went wrong in the with the Python package install, that might be able to help you pinpoint the error. But in this case, it looks like we're seeing nothing. The other place you can go is to these log files, and you can go into application, and you can go into functions, and then you can go into either function or host. They both give you the host itself is going to give you logs that are relevant for the entire VM. Let's take a look at what those look like. Okay, so you can see that it's actually executing. As part of this flow, we uploaded a sample file, and it looks like it actually successfully used the blob trigger. But this might be a place where you could kind of pinpoint some issues if this was unable to load properly. Okay, and then as I mentioned, there's also this application as well, I believe. So let's see what it was. Okay, so we have functions as well. So that all looks good. So now, the last thing I wanted to show here that I sometimes use to troubleshoot is going to this site directory and then going to www root. This is going to show the same files that you should have in VS Code. So this is an important troubleshooting step because this tells you that the files from your local VS Code were able to make its way into the VM itself. So something that you might see is like if you have the files here, but it's not recognizing the functions in your portal, that might mean something like it's possible that the host.json here is configured incorrectly. This is what kind of controls the configuration of the Azure Function app itself. If you have like a duplicate of this file, or maybe it's not configured correctly, that might cause some kind of corruption that's preventing the functions from displaying. So now that that's done, I'm going to show how we can upload a file and see it progress. And actually, before I do that, I wanted to highlight again. So in this diagram, I showed the different types of functions that we have. So we have triggers, we have orchestrator functions, and we have activities. And we can see that reflected here as well. So we have triggers such as orchestration, we have an HTTP trigger, we have a blob, and then we have about 6 activity functions. Now, if you had custom logic that were necessary in your code base, you might want to configure your own activity function to do whatever's needed. So by default, we extract text and we send it to OpenAI with a prompt. But if you wanted to do something more specific, like let's say you wanted to grab SharePoint information, or you had to do some parsing logic, something like that, you might either update one of these existing activity functions or create a new one. And the way that you can do that, if we look in our code base, is we have this activities directory, and these functions correspond exactly to to the names that are in the actual function app itself. And this function app.py is the main entry point that controls your logic. So again, we have both an HTTP trigger and a blob trigger. If you're using one or the other, it might be a good idea for you to comment out the other one. Some people like the flexibility to be able to do either, but if you know that you're only going to be using a blob trigger, it might be good to comment this out, just so that it doesn't get accidentally invoked or something like that. But it's actually good for testing as well. If you want to just get a sanity check if the blob trigger is not working for some reason, you can use this HTTP trigger to help you troubleshoot and pinpoint the issue. Because if the HTTP trigger is not working, but the blob, or I should say, if the blob trigger is not working, but the HTTP trigger is, that might mean that there's some issue with the connection to your blob storage account. It could be a permissions issue, or it could be that you have some variables that aren't configured correctly. And on that note, I'm actually going to comment here on the environment variables, which is a really important step here when you're troubleshooting various issues that might come up. So if we look at the environment variables, okay, So we can see there's another number of different variables here. Some of the key ones I'm going to point out that may cause issues sometimes. You have this Azure Web Job Storage account name. Now it has to use this exact format here, where we have these double underscores and then the account name, and this will be configured by default. But this is going to point to the storage account that actually controls the metadata for your function app. And we can see here if we look at the value, this ends in func. So that's kind of distinguish the function metadata plane from the actual data plane. So then if we look at the data storage account, we can see that this one is data. So this is where your files are going to go, things like that. Okay. So now what we're going to do is what I like to do when I'm testing this pipeline is to bring up the log stream. So I'm going to do that here, log stream. Okay. Now this log stream is going to stream real-time logs from the function app. So the way that these get populated here, there are some generic system information that gets populated. It might show for the blob trigger. There's a periodic request that gets sent out to the blob to check if there's any updates, things like that. Now if we look at our function app, okay, so we can see here that we have different logging statements. So if you're troubleshooting, you should be able to find these statements in the log stream as your file progresses. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to the storage account and I'm going to upload a sample file and we're going to see the output. Okay, so I'm going to go into the storage account here in my resource group and click on containers. And again, we're going to be uploading to the bronze container. So you can see here we have the sample file that should have already processed. I'm going to upload a new file as well just so we can see it in real time. So I'm going to upload this file, role 18 PDF. This has a number of job descriptions. And then we should see in this function app log stream, we should be able to see some of the logs that we expect. So I'm just going to search for that file name because I believe we logged that. So I think it was called role 18. Okay, so we can see that here. It's it's able to discover it in the storage account. Okay, now this is just a warning. This shouldn't be an issue typically if you see this warning. It's sometimes hard to figure out exactly what's going on, but let's see if we're able to still get an output. Okay, so we can see here that we have some activity, okay, where we grab some of the metadata. So that's a good sign. It says that a task is scheduled. We're going to run docintel, okay. And here, this is a good sign because this is showing that it's extracting all the text from the PDF. So this should match if you open that PDF. You can see there's different job titles, the chief executive officer, what his responsibilities are, the CFO, things like that. So let's go down a little bit further. Okay, again, it looks like it's processing this. I think it's sending it to Azure OpenAI. And let's see if we can get an output here. So now if we come back to this container, let's go to the silver container, and we can see we do have an output. And we also have an output for the first one. And so if we look at this, we can see here, should be able to see how many to download it. Okay, we can see that we get a role, some qualifications. It's all in a JSON structured format, so this could be used for downstream processing. Okay, so that's going to be the end of this demo. Some other things that you might want to try if you're using an MP3 case, you could upload an MP3 file and see if the speech-to-text capability works. And again, all that logic is going to be dictated in this orchestrator function. So you can see that it's checking for different audio extensions, document extensions, things like that, and it's going to process accordingly. One of the other settings that you can set on the app config resource is if you wanted to use multimodal, you can set that environment variable here, and that would enable you to send the files rather than to document intelligence directly to the LLM, which might be a little bit more costly, but potentially you might get some better performance, or you might get some more ability to recognize images, things like that. So with that, I'm going to end this. We've showed how to get our end-to-end pipeline up and running, and in future videos, we'll go into more detail on how you can customize this, how you can do zero trust deployments, and things of that sort.